P. Diddy ringing in the new year with a jailhouse meltdown, at least according to some new reports. All this comes as the disgraced singer spends his first holiday season behind bars, and a judge rules one of his accusers can remain anonymous. By now you're well aware that 55-year-old Sean Combs, also known as P. Diddy, is being held at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. He's facing federal charges of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. The charges came down in September when a grand jury indicted Diddy, half a year after those federal raids were first performed on his homes. Since he was booked, Diddy has made several bids for bail, hoping to get back to one of those homes or an apartment on New York's Upper East Side. Just last month, Diddy's team officially put in its third attempt for his release, asking that he be put on house arrest. The defense originally wanted Diddy to be held on house arrest at his Star Island mansion in Miami, Florida, one of the places that was actually raided way back in March. But Judge Arun Subramanian shot that down pretty quickly, and it was decided if Diddy was granted bail, he'd be staying in New York, specifically on the Upper East Side in a 3-bedroom apartment. That bail would have come with a $50 million price tag and some major restrictions on Diddy's house arrest. Inside the apartment, there would be 2 live-in guards and another guard downstairs. Diddy wouldn't be allowed to access any phones or the internet unless it was used to contact his legal team. And on top of all of that, there would be a vetted list of people approved to visit Diddy, including his legal counsel and, of course, his family. Diddy's attorney, Mark Agnifilo, said there was a 0% chance that Diddy would be violent if he was released, and even called the bail package a, quote, very, very rigorous set of conditions. This part is wild. He said it was even more strict than the MDC jail. But Judge Subramanian, he didn't bite on that, and Diddy's bail was denied for the 3rd time. According to a report from the Daily Mail, that's why Diddy had a breakdown. Spending the holidays behind bars was a nightmare for him. If we're to believe all this, Diddy had a meltdown in his cell and begged the guards to take him to the hospital for observation, but they refused. This same friend or person told the Daily Mail, quote, he eventually managed to calm himself down with the meditation technique he's been using while he's been behind bars. It took him a few hours of deep breathing and focusing to get out of the bad space he was in, but he finally managed it. This isn't the first time Diddy's mental health has come into question while he's been at MDC. When he first arrived, he was on suicide watch, which the U.S. Department of Justice National Institute of Corrections describes as supervisory precautions taken for suicidal inmates that require frequent observation. Diddy's suicide watch was only temporary, though. He was housed in a special protective unit of the jail after that for the first few weeks of his stay. But Diddy right now is in Gen Pop, meaning general population, the place where majority of the inmates stay. And that's where he apparently had this meltdown over the holidays, at least according to one source. Another source, though, disagrees with all of this. They say Diddy is staying strong in jail despite missing his family a great deal at Christmas, which is a time he often spends with his children. But however Diddy spent the holidays, there are still a lot of questions in the case of Sean Combs. So we're turning now to former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani to talk all things Diddy. Nima, thank you so much for coming on with us today.
Of course, Sierra. Thanks for having me, as always.
Now, some of the reports are that P. Diddy had a breakdown or meltdown over the holidays when he is still at MDC behind bars. What do you make of those reports? Could he have had this meltdown?
I believe the reports, and obviously Diddy is someone who's rich and famous and has lived a life of luxury for many years, and now he's in federal prison during the holidays. So this isn't someone who's a hardened criminal who has spent a lot of time in custody. So the fact that he's spending Christmas and New Year's and future holidays in prison is probably finally getting to him. So I'm not surprised that he cracked.
You're right. It's definitely a change of tune from his lavish mansions and the holiday season to what he's experiencing right now. As far as the mental health side of things, I remember when Diddy was first arrested, he was put on suicide watch. So obviously keeping tabs on his mental health. Here in this instance, he apparently was asking for the guards to take him to the hospital so he could be treated there. Is this something that we're going to keep an eye on, Diddy's mental health behind bars?
I think so. And obviously, we haven't seen him, but your colleague Elizabeth has reported that He looks like he's lost some weight and he has some more gray and white hairs. I think it's taken a toll on him. And I think that he expected, for some reason, that he would be out on bond. And obviously, that hasn't happened. There were three different bail applications that were denied by three different judges, and ultimately they withdrew their appeal. So now that it's hitting him that Diddy's going to be in custody at least until May 2025, I think he's just having a tough time coming to terms with it because, like you said, here's someone that had multiple private jets, homes in New York, Miami, Los Angeles, and all of a sudden his only home is his prison cell, and he's not getting the Christmas dinner with his family that he had, and we all saw the video of him having to spend his birthday in prison as well.
You talked about the bail that had been denied three separate times. And a lot of people are saying maybe Diddy did have this meltdown because he expected at this point, heading into 2025, he would be back at home, at least on house arrest. You also mentioned how his team has withdrawn their appeal. Why do you think that is? They just kind of accepted that Diddy's going to be in jail until at least the jury trial?
I think they saw the writing on the wall and the fact that, Judge Subramanian would probably be the best judge just because he's a Democratic appointee. He doesn't have a criminal background as a defense attorney or a prosecutor. So here's not someone that has a really pro prosecution perspective. He considered this bail application for 2 hours and he still denied it. And normally, when a district judge or a magistrate judge hears a bail motion, it's a de novo standard, which means for the first time. That means the previous application, the denials, they don't have any precedential impact. But when you go up on appeal, Sarah, that changes. An appellate court can only reverse a lower court's decision on bail if it's an abuse of discretion. So they really have to defer to that lower court. So the chances of the bail application being granted on appeal were less because of the different standard. And also, we know the application has gotten worse because of Diddy's own conduct while he's in prison. We've talked about how he's used other inmates' pack numbers and he's made these three-way calls allegedly, trying to intimidate witnesses. So not only do you have the bail denied because he's a risk of flight or danger to the community, but also because he's trying to obstruct justice and affect the integrity of the proceedings.
A lot going on even behind bars for Diddy. I know we talked, you and I believe, about those allegations that he was using other inmates' phone calls or their lines. You just mentioned it, to talk about things so that prosecutors couldn't listen in. I'm sure that federal prosecutors are still keeping a very close eye on P. Diddy, his communication with the outside world, as it were. Do you think they're going to use any of this information at the coming trial?
I do, because if you're a prosecutor, you have to anticipate the defense in the case. And the defense in this case is clear that the sexual contact happened, but it was consensual. So Diddy's defense team is going to do everything they can to convince the jury that even though the freak offs happened, these were consensual sexual acts by adults. So, how can they do this? They can do it through cross examination to try to show that the victims who are testifying, they're lying. They can try to pay off the victims, either through an outright bribe or a civil settlement. I'm not accusing anyone of doing anything, but these are all possibilities. The government has raised the possibility that Diddy's trying to intimidate the witnesses so they change their testimony because obviously we know doesn't matter what the victims say in their civil complaints or what they told the FBI or prosecutors. They have to take the stand, testify, and tell the jurors the exact same thing. So if these victims go sideways, either before or during trial, that really helps Diddy in the defense.
So, the testimony, I think this is going to be huge, something we've talked about, and it's really highly anticipated because they're the ones who were victims in this situation. Is the defense really going to attack that? The fact that these people are bearing all, it's probably going to be very emotional for them or very difficult to talk about on a public stage. Do you think that's something that the defense is really going to focus on?
I think so. We know, at least in the civil complaints, one of the defense strategies has been to out the victim. Some of them want to remain anonymous, right? And the defense, in almost every case, has filed a motion to unmask the identity of the accusers because they think, on the defense side, that maybe people will be more hesitant to come and talk about their sexual assault or sexual abuse at a very public trial. It's hard for victims of abuse. So I do think the defense is banking on that. And we know that some of these acts happened years, sometimes even decades ago. So they're going to point out inconsistencies in any statements that they're making and argue that this shows that they're lying. And we've already seen it with a couple of the victims who have given statements already to the media. One was an interview with CNN. Another victim gave an interview with NBC. That victim, of course, being the Alabama woman who accused both Diddy and Jay-Z. And after those interviews, the reporters and the media outlets saw some inconsistencies, things that were incorrect in terms of maybe the dates or the locations of where things happened. And I think the defense is going to use that to say, well, these people aren't mistaken. They're outright lying. And the reason they're lying is they want fame, they want money. So we're going to see a very aggressive cross examination in this case, Sierra.
The story that you brought up about Jane Doe, the woman who's accusing Diddy and Jay-Z from back in the year 2000 when she was 13 years old, that one's huge because a judge in that case just ruled she could remain Jane Doe. So for now, at least, we don't know her name. If that's the case for some of these people that the government is going to call, how will Diddy's team prepare for cross-examination if they're not sure exactly who they are or what the experience was?
So it's a little bit different in remaining anonymous in a civil case. Ultimately, if the case does go to trial, that victim will have to take the stand and testify in a public courtroom. Now, with respect to what the government is going to do in the criminal case, right? The government is not going to call more than 100 victims. That just doesn't make sense, right? The government is going to pick maybe their 5 to 10 best victims. Obviously, we know the best of all is going to be Cassie Ventura, just because there's a video and she was with Diddy for more than a decade. So she's their star witness. But after that, you want some other victims who are telling the same story of physical and sexual violence. So they're going to want victims that they think are telling consistent cases, victims that won't be beat up too much on cross-examination. Maybe that's a bad pun to use, but someone that can withhold the very aggressive attacks. I mean, we've seen just the filings in these cases, how aggressive both Combs and Jay-Z's lawyers have been when it comes to going after these victims. So you want to make sure that if you're a prosecutor, hey, this is someone that's going to hold up, because the entire case really comes down to this victim testimony. I mean, obviously, to the extent that there's video evidence, that's great. That's the best of all, because video doesn't lie. But we're talking about sex acts that happen behind closed doors. So we really need the individuals who participated in them to come and tell their story to the jury. So I think the prosecution, like I said, is going to have maybe 5 to 10 of their best witnesses. So they're going to have to disclose those witnesses to the defense and any prior statements that they've made. Obviously, there's one-way disclosure in criminal procedure. The defense doesn't have to do anything. The prosecution has to give over those names, give over those statements, so the defense will absolutely have the opportunity to prepare for the cross-examination.
We've talked about what we expect from both sides. The fact that Diddy's team is going to say, yeah, we had these freak offs, but they were consensual. And then, as you just mentioned, the incredible testimony we can expect from the prosecution, these witnesses that were involved. So that's kind of what we can expect in May when it comes time for trial. But as of now, what are these federal prosecutors doing to prepare and make sure they have an airtight case?
They're really preparing those witnesses, and they're trying to establish one of three things. The difference between sex trafficking and consensual sex is force, fraud, or coercion. They are going through their victims and they're saying, how can I establish force? How can I establish coercion? Probably not so much fraud, right? Because ultimately, this case is about sex trafficking. There's prostitution counts, and prostitution is different. Prostitution just means that the sex happened, but there was an exchange of something of value. But the feds aren't trying this case to convict Diddy of prostitution. They want to get to sex trafficking. So their entire focus right now is to prove that the sex involved that force or that coercion, right? Was it people being drugged against their will? Was there security? Were there weapons, right? That's why, even though he wasn't charged with the weapons violation, they really talked about the rifles, the assault rifles in the indictment. So I think that's going to be the focus of the Department of Justice in this case. How can we improve that force? How can we improve that coercion?
It's going to be interesting to see what they bring forward because it does seem like they have a lot of evidence. I'm glad you brought up the weapons issue because you're right, it wasn't a charge, but it's still in the court documents. Talking about the defense side of things, we've kind of inferred what their plan is, at least what we can expect. But as of right now, this next 5-ish months, what do you think the defense team is doing to prepare for the trial?
I think the defense has to go one of two ways. Either this was just purely consensual. I think that's going to be tough because I expect that there would be sex workers involved. I think they're probably going to go and say, listen, this happened. There were payments made, but no one was forced to do this, right? Prostitution is common in every state in this country. And yeah, there were prostitutes there and they were paid. And but no one was forced, no one was coerced to do this. They did this voluntarily. They did drugs, they partied, and they had sex. It's a tale as old as time. And I think that's what the defense is likely going to argue in this case.
I think a question on everyone's mind is what kind of story is Diddy going to tell? Because we haven't heard much from him since his arrest or even since the federal raids, which kind of gets me thinking, could P. Diddy take this stand? Is that something he would do? Obviously, it's up to him himself, the defendant in the case. But what do you think? Do you think that would be strong for the defense or not a great idea?
I don't think it's a good idea because, the video, especially the 2016 video of him beating Cassie Ventura is so bad. He's going to get destroyed on cross examination. If I'm defending this case, and I wouldn't defend this case, it's a very difficult case, but if I were, I would just focus on going after the victims and cross-examining them. I think that's the only chance that Combs has. Because once you take the stand, the entire case comes down to the defendant's testimony. It's a very risky proposition in a case like this where there's so much evidence against him.
As you pointed out, though, there are decades of accusations against P. Diddy, so he would probably have to go back into his brain. Okay, this was the year 2000. Here's what happened. I mean, I think you're right. I don't think we're going to see him on this stand. I am wondering, though, if we're going to see other celebrities on this stand. Jay-Z is a name that we've recently heard in that Jane Doe filing, the woman we were just speaking of. She now named Jay-Z as one of the alleged rapists. Could we hear from him or other high-profile witnesses?
It's certainly possible. Anyone that attended one of these freak offs, and certainly if they participated in it, should absolutely have their lawyer on speed dial because they can be called as a witness. And Jay Z's been identified. There's been Celebrity B, who's also named in that same civil complaint as a witness. So I think we're going to hear more and more names. Obviously, there's a lot of rumors and speculation out there. I don't want to repeat that, but I believe where there's smoke, there's fire, and I expect there to be more celebrities named in civil lawsuits soon.
That's something everybody's wondering. Who are we going to see that's called as a witness when this does go to trial? And as of right now, it's set for May, which is interesting because Diddy was arrested and charged back in September. So less than a year from that point until he goes to trial. What do you think? Do you think this May trial date is going to stay, that everyone can be prepared in time for that?
I think so. I think unless we get a superseding indictment charging sex trafficking of minors, for instance, or some of these obstruction of justice counts related to witness tampering, I think Diddy wants to go to trial as quickly as possible because he's in custody. I think it would be a very different story if Diddy was enjoying his freedom, even if he was under house arrest. We probably wouldn't see a trial until 2026. But being in custody is a major motivator for people to push their case to trial as quickly as possible. And as we've seen and heard, I don't think Diddy's doing too well in custody. So I don't think he's going to continue this just for the sake of doing so.
Really strong case from the prosecution. We can expect the same from the defense. Obviously, a story we're going to follow then and until then. Nima Ramani, thank you for coming on with us and talking about Diddy.
Thanks so much for having me, Sierra.
P. Diddy has pleaded not guilty to the federal charges against him, saying he'll prove his innocence in court. All that's supposed to go down in May when jury selection is set to begin in the federal trial.